Huawei versus Huawei, Kirin versus Snapdragon. I already showed you the Mate 50 Pro against the P50 Pro, where the P50 Pro seemed to have a better processing. Now we have here the Mate 50 Pro against its successor, the Mate 60 Pro, and the return of the Kirin chip. Can it compete and beat the Mate 50 Pro with its camera setup? We will check this out right now, so let's get started. Let's talk about the camera specs. First, both feature 50 megapixel main camera sensor with a variable aperture f1.4 to f4. We have a 13 megapixel ultra wide angle on the Mate 50 Pro and a 12 megapixel ultra wide angle on the Mate 60 Pro. Then we have a 64 megapixel 3.5 telezoom on the Mate 50 Pro and 48 megapixel telezoom, also 3.5 on the Mate 60 Pro, and then both feature the 13 megapixel front-facing camera with a 3D face unlock. And I think we start off with the front-facing camera video. Front-facing video here on the Mate 50 Pro, 4K 30, I can record up to 4K 60 frames per second. What we have here is the possibility to zoom in to 1x, which looks like this, offers the best in terms of stabilization, and the ultra wide angle, which looks like this, where you can see a lot more of my surroundings. And the default one is the 0.8 one that I think is a good compromise here, especially when it comes to vlogging. What do you think about the colors, HDR, and stabilization? And now the Mate 60 Pro, almost identical view, I would say 0.8 times magnification, 4K 30 up to 4K 60 frames per second. I can zoom into 1x, which looks like this, and I can also go to the ultra wide angle to show you a little bit more about my surroundings, and by default it's using 0.8 time magnification, which is, I think, a good compromise. What do you think about colors, stabilization, HDR, and so on the Mate 60 Pro? Now recording with the Mate 50 Pro's main camera sensor, 4K 30, we can record up to 4K 60 frames per second, and this one offers a nice background blur. By default I think it's using f2 as an aperture because we have a variable aperture on the main camera sensor, and it's a bit of sunny, so probably my face color will change a lot when I go to the shadow now, which looks probably more natural and not so reddish as you saw it before. And what we want to do is, of course, go also to the ultra wide angle, so let's just click on ultra wide angle. Now we have the ultra wide angle here on the Mate 50 Pro. What do you think about the stabilization, colors, HDR, and so on this as well? And of course we will also do a zoom test. So let's try to zoom in the bridge there in the background. I can go directly to 4x zoom here and switch now lenses, and I can go up to 10x zoom here, and this I think is 15x zoom, the maximum here on the Mate 50 Pro. And now we have 15x zoom on the Mate 60 Pro. I can also go down to 10x, which is now 10x zoom, and then I can also go down to 4x zoom, and then we are back at 1x 4K 30 frames per second. But of course I'm also able to record 4K 60 frames per second on all lenses, which is quite nice. Also the front facing camera, so on all lenses 4K 60 frames per second, which is quite good. Coming now into the sun, so probably check out the colors. How are they looking like? How's the aperture here right now? We still have 50 megapixels. We still have f2 probably as the aperture that it's using here by default. And yeah, what do you think about this one here? Of course we will also go and switch to the ultra wide angle, so let me do this quickly. Going here to the ultra wide angle, you can see the ultra wide angle is quite a little bit down below position, so I have to put my hand away so you don't see my hand. So this is the ultra wide angle. It's a new camera sensor that we're using here, also a new lens of course. And what do you think about the color, stabilization, HDR, and so on? Is it a bit better than on the Mate 50 Pro? We're coming now back into the shadow, so what do you think about the colors of my face and so on? One last thing that I want to show you right now is the f1.4 in video pro mode on the Mate 50 Pro. So how does the background blur look like? How does it cope with the autofocus? Because I noticed that sometimes the autofocus can be a hit or miss at f1.4, and sometimes focusing on the background, especially in this difficult lighting situation with the sun, sometimes illuminating my face, sometimes I'm in the shadows. So how does it look like here in terms of background blur, AF, and stabilization? And now I'm recording with the Mate 60 Pro, Video Pro mode, f1.4 set. Do we get a nicer background blur? Is the sensor a larger sensor that I expect it to be on the Mate 60 Pro? We still don't have the sensor data, at least right now when I'm recording this one here. So what do you think about this one here? Also, is the autofocus working fine? How about color stabilization and so on? What do you think about the Mate 60 Pro? So let's do a video comparison. On the left you can see the Mate 50 Pro 10 times zoom. On the right you can see the Mate 60 Pro's 10 times zoom. What you can see is the bluish kind of hint on the Mate 50 Pro. On the Mate 60 Pro it's a bit more greenish and yellowish kind of tint, but when you take a look at HDR and what you can see in terms of detail levels, and I think the Mate 60 Pro is a slight bit better. Let's go to full screen here on the Mate 60 Pro. This is the Mate 60 Pro. Look at the trees and down below here. And now let's compare it with the Mate 50 Pro, and look here, it's much darker and I think there's less details there as well. Let's check out some other things, like for example the ultra wide angle that you will see here. What we can see here is, let me make it a little bit bigger again. What we can see here is that we have a little bit of softer corners here on the Mate 50 Pro for sure, a bit darker shadows as well as a bit more cooled down image. You can see this even when I go into the shadow here a little bit, just like that. We have a much brightened, more up image, less darker shadows here as you can see, and a bit more warmer kind of colors. So you can see it here in my face, especially how much contrast it's adding to my face. The bluish tint you can see a little bit here on my shirt. And here on the Mate 60 Pro, you can see my face is a bit more warmish, more yellowish, more reddish maybe. It's not so contrasty, however, of a look. And yeah, my shirt is a bit warmer looking, and it's a bit, in general, a bit brighter of an image because the shadows are not so dark. Which one do you prefer in this case? And now let's take a look at the main camera sensor. And here we can clearly see that we have by default better background blur on the Mate 60 Pro, and I suspect that we have a larger sensor on the Mate 60 Pro for that reason, where it's like much more in focus here on the Mate 50 Pro. The Mate 50 Pro uses a 1/1.5 inch size sensor. I expect the Mate 60 Pro to be 1/1.3 inch at least. Both using f2 here for this video, and here you can see the background blur, you can see the contrasty look, you can also see that I don't think I'm looking 100% in focus here, and as well like a bit of more bluish kind of tint there. And here you can see the Mate 60 Pro, where I think I'm more in focus for sure, so the AF is working better. We can see more background blur, we can see a general more warmer exposure and a little bit lifted shadows, better HDR maybe here on the Mate 60 Pro. And it becomes very evident that we have a larger kind of sensor when we take a look at the f1.4 videos. This is the f1.4 video on the Mate 50 Pro, and this is the one on the Mate 60 Pro. First of all, you can see again even in the shadows that we have those raised kind of shadows giving me a nice exposure on my face, a bit of reddish, but both are a bit of reddish, just like I'm a little bit out of focus here in this shot because f1.4 on the Mate 50 Pro and the AF are not working as well as on the Mate 60 Pro, where the AF is spot on no matter if I'm walking in the shadows or in the sunlight. And yeah, if I scroll a bit further, you can see even if we have a bit of more sunlight here, I'm a bit of soft again. Everything is a bit of soft here, where here it is always like almost a little bit more soft than before, but it's more crispy, more sharp, and the background blur is more fantastic here. Actually, I think this background blur can compete very much with the 1 inch size sensor background blurs that you can see on the likes of Xiaomi 13 Ultra, Oppo Find X6 Pro, and so on. So yes, they definitely improved the ultra wide angle, and they improved definitely the main camera sensor. And you can argue about the telezoom lens here for video, where I would say it's also slightly better on the Mate 60 Pro. Daylight shots. So let's take a look at the Mate 50 Pro on the left and the Mate 60 Pro always on the right. What we can see here is a little bit, the difference, the contrast to the video. A little bit less contrasty look on the Mate 50 Pro. You look at the shadows, and a bit more contrasty look on the Mate 60 Pro. When we take a look at the detail levels, almost on par. I don't see much of a difference there, but you can see the more contrasty look again on the Mate 60 Pro. What we can see, however, on the Mate 60 Pro is like a little bit less punchy colors, and I think it's doing a bit better with the HDR. You can see here, I think it's having issues with HDR, just too bright of a color here, where the Mate 60 Pro handles this a little bit nicer. When it comes to the detail levels and the sharpness, I think both on par. I don't see much of a difference, maybe slightly better on the Mate 60 Pro, but it is a nuance. So when we take a look at the edges here, which one performs a bit better? I think you can see here this one is a bit sharper here, this gets a bit blurrier already. I think the Mate 60 Pro has a slight edge here, and you can see it also towards the other side of the picture, that I think we get a bit of a clearer image on the Mate 60 Pro. We have also a little bit warmer colors here and a little bit more contrasty kind of look on the Mate 60 Pro. Ultra wide angle, very interesting, because I think the improvements that I saw in video don't reflect so much what you will see here in this picture. The only thing that I noticed is that here especially either the processing is better or really the lens and sensor are slightly improved here. You can see a little bit more on this stone in terms of details, where it smudges it out on the Mate 50 Pro a little bit too much. And you can also see here the green grass, it's a little bit punchier again than on the Mate 60 Pro. The Mate 60 Pro getting a bit softer here and has more chromatic aberrations, but overall I think that the Mate 50 Pro looks here especially a little bit too artificially sharpened up, where the Mate 60 Pro keeps a little bit of more natural, softer kind of look. The image field of view is 13 millimeters on both, and when it comes to the sharpness in the middle, both are basically on par. Maybe if you zoom in a little bit more, you could argue that the Mate 60 Pro has a little bit more to offer, but this is like not really visible. Let's take a look at the zoom shots, 3.5 times zoom here. First of all, the colors are a bit wrong on the Mate 50 Pro, so this red here is not that bright of a red, it's more this dark of a red. When we take a look at the differences between both, I think they are both on par. I don't see much of a difference at 3.5 times zoom actually. At 10 times zoom it changes a bit, because here I think that we have a bit of a clearer image on the Mate 50 Pro, where it's a bit of more blurry on the Mate 60 Pro and a bit more processed looking, where it's cleaned up on the Mate 50 Pro for sure, and you can see it clearly here as well. It's a bit blurry on the Mate 60 Pro. If I zoom in a little more, you can see the white balance change on the Mate 60 Pro. For some reason it's getting a bit more yellowish here, the sign yellowish greenish. And when we take a look at 100%, you can see how much like it is processing, and you can see some pixels here and noise creeping in already on the Mate 60 Pro, over sharpened for sure as well, that we don't have so much on the Mate 50 Pro. So the processing here at 30 times zoom is a bit better on the Mate 50 Pro. Let's go to the macro lens, and here we utilize the ultra wide angle on the Mate 50 Pro. The Mate 60 Pro is utilizing its 3.5 times zoom. This is why you get this nice background blur. When we zoom in, both are doing fantastic job, but when you take a look at the 100% view, yes, it's a tiny bit over sharpened on the Mate 60 Pro, but still it offers you the more dramatic kind of macro shot. And you can see it here with every kind of photo. The Mate 50 Pro is very, very good, but the Mate 60 Pro just beats it, comes very close to the results that I got with the P60 Pro as well. So yes, the telezoom for macros is definitely a bit better on the Mate 60 Pro, and you can see it here as well with the colors and the detail levels here of this flower, where here the Mate 50 Pro even did not really get the colors right. A bit washed out. Ultra wide angle again, to show you that the ultra wide angle on the Mate 50 Pro has, I think, a little bit better of HDR. First of all, we have again this not so much contrasty look, where the Mate 60 Pro has a bit of more contrast, but you can see maybe a little bit more details there as well, and a bit more punchy look on the Mate 50 Pro. And when we take a look at the sides here, you can see a little bit of chromatic aberrations on the Mate 60 Pro that are corrected correctly on the Mate 50 Pro. There's not so much pronounced there. You can see a color shift, a bit more bluish kind of colors on the Mate 50 Pro, a bit of warmish kind of colors on the Mate 60 Pro. Not much of a difference that I can see here. Basically on par when it comes to those. Slightly improved maybe on the Mate 60 Pro, but you can argue it's like not very visible. And the same you could argue also with the main camera lens. You can see very interesting, more warmer tone on the Mate 50 Pro, more cooler tone on the Mate 60 Pro when it comes to the sky and the river here. But when it comes to the pavement here, you can see we have a bit of a cooler look on the Mate 50 Pro, a bit warmer look on the Mate 60 Pro. Very interesting, this kind of color difference. Otherwise, when it comes to the details on both, I think both doing very, very fine. I don't see much of a difference there, especially when it comes to such daylight shots. You don't notice so much. Maybe you could argue, especially when I go here to the sides, that the Mate 60 Pro is doing a tiny bit better here, especially with this building here, where here it looks a little bit less detailed, but this is a bit softer as well. This is really, really hard to tell the difference between those two here in this regard. As you can see here, it's basically on par. Let's take a look at zoom shots again. Very interesting, the color shift here when I'm using the 3.5 times zoom. More greenish on the Mate 50 Pro, more bluish on the Mate 60 Pro for some reason. Detail level basically on par. Maybe you could argue a little bit slightly raised shadows on the Mate 60 Pro, so you can see a little bit more here, where here it's like crushed in darkness. Then let's take a look at 10 times zoom. 10 times zoom, very comparable as well. Again, you can see the color shift. This is more like magenta-ish kind of color that you can see in the background as well. More greenish here on the Mate 50 Pro. Detail levels, you can see that here, especially on the construction side, that there's, I think, a slightly improvement on the Mate 60 Pro, and especially also here with this notes that you can see, music notes. I think that here you can see a slightly improvement on the Mate 60 Pro as well, and apparent here in the 30 times zoom is this as well. Both basically unusable at 30 times zoom, both still this color shift issues, but here on the top right corner I think it looks a bit clearer on the Mate 60 Pro. So yes, maybe the better processing of the Kirin processor is helping here. Maybe the lens is also a tiny bit better. Another zoom shot here where I think that the Mate 50 Pro is doing a slight worse job. Look at the tires here, how smoothened up they are. Look at the Mate 60 Pro at 10 times zoom. You can see a little bit of the details there. Colors are different here again, a little bit, might be because the sun was shining there, but yeah, I think overall maybe slightly bit better on the Mate 60 Pro, but it's very hard to tell for this kind of zoom shots. Very interesting, and this is why I claim that the Mate 60 Pro has a larger camera sensor as the close focusing distance when you're going into Pro mode and taking a shot with the main camera sensor at f1.4. This is how close I could get with the Mate 50 Pro, and I have, yeah, not 100% sharpness I would say, but almost 100% sharpness. The Mate 60 Pro was completely blurry, so I had to step really a lot back, as you can see here, but could get this shot that is arguably a bit sharper. You can see even like a bee or wasp sitting there on this flower, but yeah, I had to step back a little bit. So yes, I think that the Mate 60 Pro has a larger sensor. This is why you cannot get so close to subject and it's still focusing. And the same you can see here as well. I can get closer with the Mate 50 Pro and have this leaf sharp. This is like a very dried up leaf, as you can see here. And with the Mate 60 Pro I have to step back a little bit. I get a little bit sharper kind of image, I would say, arguably. And the bokeh is pretty much the same, even though I'm a little bit further away there. The bokeh balls look almost the same, so I think at f1.4, both here again, I think this is the reason why I think the Mate 60 Pro has a larger sensor. 1/1.3 is what I just claim now, I suspect it to be. You can see also a little bit like cooler colors here, a bit warmer colors here, maybe also slightly some issues here with the HDR. that we don't see so much on the Mate 50 Pro. So something that the Mate 60 Pro still has to improve. When it comes to selfies, almost the same, a bit blurrier image again on the Mate 60 Pro, maybe to be on par with the main camera sensor. Interestingly enough, the Mate 50 Pro, even though it has only the 13 megapixels, is upscaling it to 32 megapixels for some reason. I'm not sure why, but this means like you get like a very closed up shots in comparison to the Mate 60 Pro. But I think when it comes to the detail level, let's try to zoom at the same level basically. We can see basically on par. We have slightly warmer kind of face, more shadows eventually, slightly more shadows and contrast on the Mate 50 Pro, and I think a warmer look on the Mate 50 Pro. Otherwise it's basically on par without the bokeh mode. The portrait here again more shadowy on the Mate 50 Pro, less shadowy on the Mate 60 Pro, different kind of colors, a bit warmer on the Mate 50 Pro, and a bit more greenish, more pale looking on the Mate 60 Pro, and less contrasty again. I think the detail levels are on par, though here, when I let me zoom in slightly, you can see that the Mate 50 Pro appears to have a little bit more details here on my mic at the bottom. Then using the portrait mode with the main camera lens, we have the Mate 50 Pro only allowing us 1, 2 and 3 times. I'm using the 2 times here, and this is what you can get out of it. I think it looks okay. 2 times is I think the borderline that still looks okay. If you go to 3 times, it doesn't look so good anymore. We'll see this just in a second. And this is also using the 2 times, just a little bit closer there, but you can see that it's a bit sharper there as well. This is why I'm expecting it to have like a little bit of a better sensor there on the Mate 60 Pro. And now portrait mode versus portrait mode. One-time portrait mode actually also very interesting. Here we have again a bit of blurrier image on the Mate 60 Pro. This is why I think this is a natural kind of blurriness that comes also from the larger sensor that we're using on the Mate 60 Pro. And then we have the 3.5 times the Mate 60 Pro versus 3 times in portrait mode. The Mate 60 Pro offers 3.5 times, the Mate 50 Pro only 3 times. Difference here, it looks already very good on the Mate 50 Pro, but the Mate 60 Pro is beating it hands down, as you can see how sharp and detailed this cat looks like. Yes, I forgot my dog. He was staying at home, and photographing a cat that I saw there sitting on this wall. Yeah, and that's it basically for the daylight shots. Is nighttime video any good on the Huawei Mate 60 Pro? I'm using the main camera sensor right now, standing under a lamp here, so it is a little bit bright. What about if I go into this direction or into the dark? And internal mics, by the way, so you also hear the internal mics, which are quite good. I think Huawei nailed it with the internal mics. And hopefully the aperture is going on wide open right now, f1.4, and you can see something of me. I'm recording 4K 30. I think it can go down to 4K 24 frames per second for a little bit of a brighter image. What do you think? Now recording with the Huawei Mate 50 Pro. How does this compare to the Huawei Mate 60 Pro? What do you think about the nighttime, standing under the lamp, just moving the same direction to see how good it handles the light? Hopefully also using f1.4 as aperture. I'm going to the dark right now, and hopefully you can still see me. Also recording 4K 30 frames per second, and hopefully it's also switching maybe to 24 frames per second, so you see a little bit more of my face there. What do you think? Which one is better? Night photos. We start off with the Mate 50 Pro, producing a bit warmer image here in my normal test inside of my bathroom, and a bit of like colder image on the Mate 60 Pro, but also over processed, as you can see, especially with the text. So it still has some processing issues that it needs to fix, and you can see it here also with the over processed text all over the place, and this is something they need to fix. Also here we have also first indication of the Mate 50 Pro overexposing stuff a little bit or brightening things up a little bit. Here the Mate 60 Pro has a more accurate color of this little wallet here, and then we go to the next photo where you can see also the color difference. On first glance it looks a little bit worse on the Mate 60 Pro, but this has something to do with the Mate 50 Pro trying to raise the shadows. When I zoom in to 100%, you will see that there's a bit more noise going on the Mate 50 Pro, and you can see also some blue spots here and there, which is color noise that it tries to reduce. It's doing a quite good job, but you can see it all over the place, and also here in this little back, and here on the Mate 60 Pro you can see that there's a pattern on the back that is completely smoothened out on the Mate 50 Pro. So I think overall the sensor on the Mate 60 Pro is a slightly bit better. It needs a bit better processing, but it's slightly bit better. Portrait shots in low light conditions, Mate 60 Pro 3.5 times, definitely winning with sharpness, not as good as in daylight, but you can see a big difference. 3.5 times with using its dedicated sensor, and the Mate 50 Pro portrait shot at 3 times zoom. Outside with the front-facing camera, they both use the illumination of the display for brightening up the scene. You can see a lot of color noise here in the background. I think the Mate 50 Pro is doing a better job with the background. But when it comes to my face itself, I think the sharpness and the detail level is nailed on the Mate 60 Pro a little bit better. This has something to do maybe also with the Mate 50 Pro having this issue or this feature of not only overexposing, but also of just upping the resolution to 32 megapixels for some reason. But you can see the color of my face is a little bit weird here on the Mate 50 Pro, where it's more evenly lit on the Mate 60 Pro. So I would take here the Mate 50 Pro's background and the foreground of the Mate 60 Pro. Main camera sensor, a lot warmer. For some reason the Mate 50 Pro decided that this lamp here on the top left is white instead of yellow, which is usually the case, it should be. But the processing on the Mate 60 Pro still needs some work. As you can see here, it tries to process something in the background which looks a bit weird. Also the text processing here is super weird, and it gets a bit mushy here in the green grass, where the Mate 50 Pro keeps it real there, a bit over sharpened for sure. But yeah, this is what I can see here. 3.5 times zoom versus 3.5 times zoom win for the Mate 60 Pro, and at 10 times also win for the Mate 60 Pro. But I think the processing still needs some work on the Mate 60 Pro, especially here down below. You can see it's like trying to over process stuff, where the Mate 50 Pro is not doing this. In terms of color science, the Mate 60 Pro is more true to life, because this is here down below white, and here it's totally green for some reason, and here this not that blue, it's a little bit lighter blue, but it's also not that kind of green that we can see here. So yes, it's something in between. And the ultra wide angle is doing a fantastic job on both, but I think the Mate 60 Pro is less noisy and doesn't brighten up the sky so much. So you see some noise here, but this is like brightening up the sky, and you can see a lot more noise. Otherwise, in terms of sharpness, I think the Mate 50 Pro appears to be a bit sharper here in this case, but processing is almost the same there. I like the Mate 60 Pro's colors a little bit better than the Mate 50 Pro's here in this occasion, but for some reason it's like brightening this too light, too white, this kind of lantern there, lamp. And then the dedicated night mode on both, what we can see here is we have a bit more details on the Mate 60 Pro, but the Mate 50 Pro is brightening things up again. So you can see here the front banners and advertisements that are completely dark on the Mate 60 Pro. Otherwise, when we can see here, night mode is the Mate 60 Pro is also winning in terms of processing, sometimes like this here, where you can see the iRun text here on the Mate 60 Pro, and it's like a bit of like almost not visible on the Mate 50 Pro. And then we have another shot with 3.5 times zoom, and here I think the 3.5 times zoom failed on the Mate 50 Pro. It was bright enough for it to activate, but you can see like the stitching of the different images that it took is like not so great, where the Mate 60 Pro just simply wins, especially here also with the detail level and sharpness all over the place, where yeah, the Mate 50 Pro is a bit mushy. And then here also this night shot overexposed on the Mate 50 Pro a little bit, and too much punch in the colors here, especially in the green grass, where the Mate 60 Pro keeps it more real. And then selfie portrait with bokeh effect circles. You can see the lamp both doing a fine job, but I think when you zoom in also that the Mate 60 Pro again is a little bit sharper here. And let's try the other way around and zoom in here. You can see, yeah, slightly bit maybe sharper on the Mate 60 Pro, otherwise both doing a fine job. The background appears to be a bit more greenish here than there, but that's it. Night sky photography, if you want to photograph the sky and the stars, you can see the color difference here. Both have some issues with sharpness and with moving subjects, as you can see here. And this is a bit more blue, this is a bit darker overall. And when it comes to the stars and their movements, yeah, maybe the Mate 50 Pro a little bit better there, but I did not try out any more here. So what do you think? Who is the winner in terms of night photography? So here we have the rating of both. As you can see, the Huawei Mate 60 Pro is winning in the main camera department, has a better main camera. The ultra-wide angle is a hit or miss. Sometimes it's a little bit better than the Huawei Mate 50 Pro, but then it has some processing issues, chromatic aberration and so on. I would say they are on par. The zoom photo quality is a little bit better, I would say, in general, not because of the zoom reach, but because of the possibilities of close focusing distance and sharpness and portrait lens effect that you don't have with the Mate 50 Pro. Video recording quality has improved. It's a bit better thanks to the new main camera, and especially also because of the autofocus. And I think the shadows not so harsh, a little bit better HDR and so on is also working fine. And the rest is basically on par. And what we want to check out now is the total ranking. As you can see here with this kind of points, the Huawei Mate 60 Pro is now sitting at the top of my ranking list. Closely behind is the Huawei P60 Pro with a little bit worse kind of main camera lens, but has a better zoom photo quality, especially for lower lights. And video recording quality is slightly worse because of the weaker main camera sensor. Autofocus performance is also slightly worse with the main camera sensor there. Front cam and camera UI as well as camera features are on par. The P50 Pro has the best zoom quality here from the Huawei P or Mate series still. And the Mate 50 Pro is like, because of the zoom capabilities being slightly weaker, moving down here. And as you can see here, the rest has been updated as well. The camera UI is now on par because of HarmonyOS 4.0 and the buttons for zooming in and zooming out. So this is my end result. What are your thoughts about the Huawei Mate 60 Pro? Write it down in the comment section. That's everything for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Until the next time. Bye.